What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to talk through my 7 must buy and sell trade targets for week 12 of the fantasy football season, and not just week 12, but the entire season. I know a lot of trade deadlines have already passed. A lot of them are happening this week or next week, and with Thanksgiving next week, I won't have a video out then, and probably trade deadlines will happen, Wednesday or Thursday. So this is it. We're going to talk through some buys, some sells, all of them through the lens of late season schedules, playoff schedules, whether they're easy or they're hard. Again, some buys, some sells. You can tweak your lineups as we set everything in stone heading into the fantasy playoffs here. As always, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe if you're new. Let's go.
VVS stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. She gon' let me.
Now, we'll just address something up top. My hair looks crazy today. It is what it is. It's been a long season, a difficult season, but I grind it all out for you guys. I have no problem in doing so, but we'll be getting a haircut tomorrow. So, Top 10 Lessons Learned video will be out Monday, and we'll be looking crispy and fresh. Now, our first trade target here is going to be Tony Pollard. All right, he is a buy for me, and I will be honest, we usually go through these and we go to the fantasy calc, we look through trade database and recommend trades, but it's late season. I want to put more emphasis on just the late season stuff than I do the individual trades themselves. But if you can kind of take some bench pieces, maybe somebody needs a wide receiver and Tony Pollard's not getting in this person's lineup, and you just want like a low-end RB2 for the late season stretch, I think Tony Pollard is a good buy for a couple of reasons. First up, he gets a boost this week, right? Tyjae Spears is ruled out for week 12, and that should give him a lot of touches. He has had over 20 opportunities in every game where Tyjae Spears is not playing. Now, I am looking up, they are playing against the Texans this week. The Texans are a good defense, but if he's going to get 20 touches in that game, it's tough to project him for anything less than like 15 fantasy points. So that's perfect. RB2, he's going to have a bunch of opportunities here without Tyjae Spears, and then Tyjae Spears with a concussion should be back, and then there should be more of a split, but this is when the schedule really eases up for Tony Pollard, right? When we look here, I looked up each team's fantasy points allowed. That's just, raw fantasy points allowed to that position via Fantasy Pros, I believe. And then EPA per rush, right? For a running back here, that's just in a given play, how much EPA are they giving up? That is just yards, touchdowns, first downs, all with context, where I give this example every time, but if a running back gets 3 yards on a 4th and 2, that's going to hurt their yards per carry. It's going to not look all that efficient, but you got a first down. That is huge. So it kind of weighs those things instead of just raw yardage. Now, after Houston, 4 of his final games, right? He gets Jacksonville twice. He gets Washington, Cincinnati, Indianapolis. 4 of those 5 games are against bottom 10 EPA per rush opponent. Now, I know it's like confusing. It's like, well, aren't they the 10th best? No, it's the worst. That's why it's green, right? So the Washington is 10th worst. Jacksonville is 9th worst. So that's all easy down the stretch. Jacksonville's allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to running backs right now. 13th for Indianapolis, 12th for Washington. That's nice. There's nothing all that difficult here. Will Levis is kind of finding his groove. Right now, Tony Pollard's like the RB24-ish in points per game. He should be an RB2 rest of the way. And if you're down bad at RB2, maybe you just lost Kareem Hunt, right? I say lost, but, you're assuming Pacheco's back and you got air behind him. I do think Tony Pollard is a fine player to go grab if you have some depth on your bench looking for him. Now, this next buy, people always get mad when I put like really good players as buys, but hear me out. Bijan Robinson, right? The RB4. It's not very easy to acquire him, but he was shaky in the beginning of the season. There could be a team out there right now that's like 5-6, maybe 4-7 with Bijan Robinson, and they can't afford to have him on a bye week this week. So this is your final opportunity. It's not going to be a buy low, but can you offer like a slight piece plus Kamara or a slight piece plus, Breece Hall or Jonathan Taylor or Kyron Williams, one of these guys, Breece Hall's on bye, but all those other guys also make sense of top flight RB1s. Can you turn them in for Bijan just to give this guy some production while he's on a bye week, especially because he is coming off of a down week, right? And you look at what he did last week. He had just 10 PPR points after a streak of a bunch of 20 pluses. Like I think he rattled off maybe like 6 straight games of 20 plus points. This should be I don't know why it's not pulled up right now, but this should be it. Yeah, so he had, shaky start to the year. Then he gives you 25, 23, 23, 21, 29, and then 10.3. So you take 10.3. Maybe that costed this owner a loss. Now it's a bye week. He needs a win. He can't afford to not have Bijan or an RB1 in his place. So you can go out there and offer him a nice running back in return. Now, I do realize I mentioned Kamara. Of course, he's on bye, but there's just a bunch of running backs right now that are playing that you can offer as kind of a swap for Bijan. Not just a swap, but you include them with a piece. Now, why we are buying? Because the usage hasn't looked this good all season. Like, it started to lead up to this, but last week, this is usage that I've dreamed of for Bijan. After screaming, I think that this was the game before, I think Tyler Algier got 3 straight carries at the goal line, stuffed on all of them. Bijan comes in on 4th down and punches it in. We've been seeing this all year. Bijan gets him down the field, and then magically they get in the red zone. They give Bijan a breather. Tyler Algier gets stuffed a couple times, and it just looks really tough on paper when you just look at the play-by-play. Now we have this game where here from Dave Richard up top, you have 93% of the snaps for Bijan, 7% for Algier. That is a massive split. Earlier on in the year, it was like 60-40, like 50-50, like 55-45. Like we're talking like early. Then it's kind of shifted to like a 60-40-ish type of split. And now we're, these are numbers we haven't seen since like prime Todd Gurley. And that's what we were looking for, from Robinson, the OC in Atlanta. He comes from the Rams system. We were saying all offseason this is going to be Todd Gurley usage. It wasn't that, but it might be that moving forward. Ryan Heath says here on the bottom, Jace McClellan played the final 2 drives of this 38-6 blowout. But before then, Bijan handled every backfield carry. Tyler Algier just had a single target. So you got all the touches, you got all the work, all the snaps. And if this is even like an 80-20 split moving forward, with the kind of schedule he has down the stretch, this is somebody that could be, one of those guys we look back when ESPN puts out those percentage of championship teams with this player. It would not shock me at all if Bijan was the number 1 guy there if that usage sticks. And of course, his efficiency he's had all year sticks with him as well. Now we look at his end of season schedule. He's a receiving back. He is 3rd among running backs in targets right now with 49. So he's a receiving back. The nice part is he has 2 tough matchups coming off of the bye. The Chargers and Minnesota, right? Bottom 3 in terms of fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Really, really tough defenses. But look at their RB target percentage allowed. This is from fantasy points, where they just look at like the target share to each position or each alignment. And you can see the Chargers allow the 6th highest target share to the running back position, Minnesota the 11th highest. Then he has Vegas allowing the 7th most fantasy points to running backs and the 8th highest target share allowed to running backs. New York Giants 16th in terms of points allowed, but that's really just because they don't score a lot of points, but they're the 2nd worst rushing defense, and they're the 4th highest target share allowed to running backs, so they allow a lot of receptions. They're also not very good at stopping the run. And then Washington's like a favorable matchup, right? 12th most fantasy points allowed, 10th worst rushing defense. We saw what Saquon did to them last week. So Bijan should be a monster down the stretch. And again, if you could buy low on any discount that he's on the buy or he's coming off a 10-point game, do it. When I say discount, I mean you're giving up a stud running back. But if you can give up a stud running back in a piece to go get Bijan, I absolutely would. Now, of course, I think the guys I would have ahead of Bijan at this point would just simply be, at this point, I won't recommend anybody to sell Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. Probably put McCaffrey there. I think like McCaffrey and or actually no, we actually just got news as I click record. I think Brandon Allen's starting. So Brock Purdy's hurt. It's literally Saquon and Derrick Henry is the only running backs that I could hear an argument for ahead of Bijan Robinson. After that, it's Bijan. So anybody ranked behind him, again, Kyron, JT, Kenneth Walker is I think a good name. As much as I love him, if you can swap Walker for Bijan, just give a nice little wide receiver throw in as well. On top of that, I'm trying to think. I should just let me pull up my rest of season rankings here. But yeah, any of those running backs, I think McCaffrey's actually a good one now. Not saying that McCaffrey's a sell now that Brock Purdy's not in the mix, but if you can sell like McCaffrey and a piece and get, I'm not talking like a random piece. I'm talking a real piece to go get Bijan. I think you should do that. Yeah, Mixon's one. I love Achane, but if you can turn Achane into Bijan, you probably should think about it very hard. Gibbs is another one as well. If you could turn, I like Gibbs a lot, but if you could turn Gibbs into Bijan by adding a small piece on top, I probably would. Again, he's a top 3 running back rest of season. at worst. Now, our third buy candidate here is David Njoku. Now, I know he played last night, right? We're recording this on Friday. Here's what I'll say. This is for anyone who doesn't have a trade deadline until next week, so you can buy him early on, next Monday or Tuesday, whatever. Or if you're on like a sleeper league, you can buy him today. And if you're in a good enough spot, right? Maybe you are. I'm trying to think. 8-4. Nope, not possible. If you're 8-3, something like that. If you can go out there and grab Njoku, shoulder the 3.9 points he gave you this week, and then move forward with him, I think you'd be better for it. He is to me a top. I have him tight end 5 rest of season moving forward. I think that is a perfect spot for him. So if you have like a weak tight end spot, maybe you just lost Jake Ferguson, or maybe Jake Ferguson's, he's been rough since Dak Prescott got hurt. Maybe your tight end spot is just a little weak right now. I do think Njoku's a nice guy to add for this late season push. You have Jameis Winston in there playing great football. He won last night in the snow. And outside of the game versus Steelers in the snow, he has been at 40 pass attempts or more in every game that he has started and finished. That is, I believe, a 3-game sample. Before that, the team was averaging 33.3 pass attempts per game with Deshaun Watson. So we're getting more volume. And then on top of that, with Jameis Winston, David Njoku is the tight end 4 in usage in terms of volume, ADOT, targets, all of that, but just a tight end 8 in points per game. So he's actually underperforming his volume, but we've seen Njoku be efficient before. That could bounce back, regress to the mean a little bit. And then also, he has a favorable schedule down the stretch here. We look at fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Denver's a tough one, but then Pittsburgh allows the 13th most, Kansas City the 5th most, Cincinnati the 3rd most, Miami the 16th most, but the important part is that Njoku's an inline tight end. When we look at fantasy points, their data, they don't just have like target share allowed to tight ends, they have target share allowed to alignments, right? So like wide, slot, running back, inline. And inline, that's just going to be right next to the tackle. That's where Njoku will operate. That's where George Kittle will operate. Of course, you have some more of these slot type guys who are more of like hybrid receivers, kind of like a Kyle Pitts. And Njoku's a traditional receiver. So inline target percentage is actually really, really important for him. And outside of this Denver game, which is going to be a tough game, Denver has one of the best defenses in the NFL. It's going to lighten up, where Pittsburgh allows the 11th highest target share to inline tight ends, 13th highest for Kansas City, 6th highest for Cincinnati, 5th highest for Miami. If David Njoku came out and was like a 25-point scorer in Week 17 and won championships, it wouldn't shock me at all if we kind of saw some high scoring from Stefanski and McDaniel there. Then after that, we have another buy candidate. And this is somebody who was a sell for me a while ago. I did not see it coming when it came to Calvin Ridley. I talked about this in the past on another trade target video. I don't think he's ever been a sell for us. I think that I hopped on JJ Zacharyason's show. I posted it here. Hopkins left. I wasn't buying into the Ridley stuff, but he's been amazing, man. Since Hopkins left, he is the wide receiver 11 in points per game, and he's coming off a game this past week where he finished under 10 PPR points for the first time. So if there is a buy window where people don't really understand what they have in Calvin Ridley at this point, I would make an offer, because right now I ranked him as my wide receiver like 30, which I think is fine, like a mid-range wide receiver 3, and if you need that for the stretch run where you just don't have enough flex options or enough like high upside flex options, I do think Ridley is a good guy to go after, especially with his late season schedule. Like this is, again, you have to factor in his quarterback's not great, but Will Levis has been slinging it a little bit. I don't know. I mean, Callahan's, he's done all right with this team, but the big thing is that he gets Jacksonville twice. Not only is Jacksonville revenge game, but they are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers and are allowing the highest EPA per pass play in the NFL. So that is, magic for Calvin Ridley. Should be absolutely perfect for him. He gets Houston this week, which isn't great. They're allowing the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers, but also a really good pass defense. So I don't know how that works, but should be decent for fantasy. Cincinnati's allowed a lot of blowouts. Washington and the Colts are kind of neutral, but those 2 Jacksonville games, game before, the most important one, getting you into the playoffs, and then the championship game is absolutely massive, Week 17. Man, throat's still a little bit dry from getting sick a few weeks ago, but moving on from that, we have Jakobi Meyers. I never thought I'd have Jakobi Meyers as a buy here, but again, these are just low-profile buys, because I think that's the thing right now. It's actually really funny. The way that this year has gone, wide receiver is the position at a premium. Like, you cannot go buy Jamar Chase. You cannot go buy Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Any of the, very few difference-making wide receivers right now, and they aren't acquirable. So I'm not going to recommend, hey, go out there and, go make an offer for Jefferson. See how that goes, fellas. But if you need a flex option, right? Maybe it's a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex league, or a 3 wide receiver, 1 flex league. Jakobi Meyers, not a bad guy to look at. All right, he's the wide receiver 27 in points per game since Devontae Adams left, and he hasn't played for the Raiders since week 3. So from week 4 on, he's the wide receiver 27 in points per game, and he's the wide receiver 20 in usage in terms of volume. So he's actually getting used a ton, even with Brock Bowers next to him. And his rest of season schedule, man, is a cakewalk. Now, of course, Denver is tough. KC will be tough in terms of fantasy points allowed. But you get Tampa Bay allowing the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, Atlanta the 5th most, Jaguars the 3rd most, and then the Colts are a neutral matchup, which should be fine. But the last 4 games of the season, he is going to be like a top 25, top 30 type of option. And I just don't think that Jakobi Meyers is like a sexy name, so I think you should be able to buy him pretty low. If you could just give somebody, I don't know, if you're running like 2 tight ends, maybe Taysom Hill's been a revelation for you, and the tight end you were using before, maybe like you could sell one of them to go get Jakobi Meyers. It shouldn't be too expensive. Then we have our sells here, right? We have 2 sells to finish off the show, 2 running backs. And first up, we have DeAndre Swift. All right? I think that this is the perfect time to sell DeAndre Swift. Last week, he gave you 16.4 PPR points. He kind of bailed you out on a very long touchdown run, which, of course, that's what he's going to do. That is DeAndre Swift's game. All right, he's going to give you -1, then 3, then -2, then 2, then 3, then 2, then 1, and then he'll give you a 40-yard rushing touchdown. That's what he does. But the biggest appeal of DeAndre Swift, and I say this as somebody that loved DeAndre Swift coming out, have fallen in love with DeAndre Swift every step of his career besides this year, he hasn't given you the receiving. And that's the scary part. Or he has given you the receiving a little bit this year, but not with this new coaching change of Shane Waldron to Thomas Brown. We have DeAndre Swift in Week 10. Shout out to the utilization report over on Fantasy Life. And you can see here his usage. Week 10, that's with Shane Waldron. Week 11, with the new play caller and Thomas Brown. He goes from 68% of the snaps to 54%. 89% of the rush attempts to 48%. Routes about the same. Targets, 4%, 6%. The routes, if your routes aren't at 60% plus, you're not really a receiving back at that point. But his short down and distance, so these are goal line carries. 13% short down and distance, 33% inside the 5. Those have all shifted to Roschon Johnson. Long down and distance, this is where you would be a receiving back, right? 3rd down, long down scenarios, 2-minute drill scenarios. He goes from 35% and 42% to 9% and 0%. So he's no longer the goal line back or the preferred goal line back. He's no longer the preferred pass-catching running back. And you now have just a 2-down grinder between the 20s on the Chicago Bears. Think about that for a second. He's coming off a top 12 finish. If there was a time to sell, it would be now, right? He gave you 16 touches, a touchdown in this game, but his usage in terms of his profile of the 2 things we want, right, in PPR, catches to get PPR points, touchdowns to get those 6 points, those are no longer there. So, on top of that, this is a brutal schedule. 31st in points allowed, Minnesota. 29th, Detroit. San Francisco, a tough defense as well. And if they're not going to have Purdy, who knows? I don't trust. I will never be trusting Kyle Shanahan again with whatever he says about an injury. We've seen that with Christian McCaffrey and now Brock Purdy. If Brock Purdy has to have season-ending shoulder injury, it wouldn't shock me in the slightest. I don't know. As a fantasy, I think that you guys are probably pissed off at Kyle Shanahan as well, but he's kind of a snake, man. He has to play Minnesota again, Detroit again, and then Week 17 is when it finally lets up. Seattle would be an easy matchup. We're talking about 5 straight matchups of really tough games. This offense hasn't been great. All of these defenses are actually good against the rush. Detroit's actually a pass funnel where their opponents are just passing the ball because running the ball has been such a hopeless endeavor. So if you can sell on a brutal schedule and a role change that maybe people aren't aware. Maybe people don't realize, these games are going to be tough. Maybe they don't realize that Roschon Johnson has taken a lot of the valuable work in this backfield. I think selling DeAndre Swift to somebody who is very desperate for a running back isn't a terrible idea. Now, our last sell here is Austin Ekeler. This one's a really low-key one, but he is the RB24. He's had 2 back-to-back big weeks, and if you can sell on that hype, I probably would. And here's why. Week 10 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he had, 1 catch, 3 yards per carry. It was a game where Bijan Robinson was banged up, and he bailed you out with 2 touchdowns. The week before that, that was without Bijan Robinson versus a Giants, bad team. Then Philadelphia, he had 9 targets. He was the leading receiver, 8 catches, 89 yards. So now Bijan Robinson is back. He's not going to catch more passes and have more receiving yards than Terry McLaurin the rest of the way. I do know that they run a lot of 2 backfield sets or 2 running back sets, which is really cool from Cliff Kingsbury. I like that. But Bijan Robinson's going to get involved here. They've kind of been in a rut offensively. I doubt they want to run their offense through Austin Ekeler. And I think if I could sell on 3 straight weeks of good outputs, I would here if he's not somebody that's going to be in your starting lineup very much down the stretch. You can see here his schedule, it's not terrible, but it's also not great here, where he's someone that's going to get a lot of targets. Dallas is a great matchup this week, so you can always use that as a selling point, right? He's going against Dallas this week. He's going to go off, even with Bijan Robinson. Boom, you sell him for that, and then he has a bye week, week 14. So if you need to win now and you need points now, if you can kind of turn him into something else, maybe he's not a running back you need, you can turn him into an actual wide receiver. Maybe use your wide receiver 3 plus Ekeler to upgrade your wide receiver 3. That's a great option as well. Tennessee is going to be a tough one, right? 18th most points allowed to running backs, 28th target share to running backs. So where he is successful, he's going to struggle there. Then he's on bye, so he can't help you there. Then New Orleans, who allowed the 5th most fantasy points to running backs, but the 26th highest target share to running backs. So that's more of a Bijan Robinson game. Now, you have Philadelphia, you have Atlanta. Those are really tough defenses against the run, but they are going to allow a target share to the running backs. So a little bit of a tough one to gauge with Austin Ekeler in those final 2 weeks. I will say I doubt that they go against Philly again, and Philly just allows him to get 90 receiving yards. So that's the game plan after what happened on Thursday night. And then we'll see what happens in Atlanta, but I just don't think it's just not all that juicy. He'll be missing a game, and if I can sell high on 3 good performances plus a Dallas game coming up here, I would try to. But he's not somebody like if you have Austin Ekeler and you're running like a hero RB team or a 0 RB team, and he's starting for you in the running back 2 spot every single week, don't sell him. I'm just saying if he's dead weight, now would be the time to trim some of that fat. Now, that is going to do it for us today. I appreciate you guys watching the entire video here. If you made it this far, make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy. They keep the lights on here in the basement. Use promo code RON. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000, and you'll get a Matthew Stafford free pick'em entry in the pick'em lobby, higher than 0.5 total yards. And you can string it together with, they have like college basketball, they have NBA, of course they have NFL. And then if you're into NBA as well, they're doing promos every day of the in-season tournament. So this is going to be out on Friday. I believe that, today's Friday, November 22nd. So that'll be today. And then what's that? Probably it. And then not again until Tuesday. So all of that's available to you. But if you're not interested, that's all good. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze.